Okay, in this video we're going to be looking at how to collect sample data. The key concept is this: if sample data are not collected in an appropriate way, the data may be so completely useless that no amount of statistical torturing can salvage them. Okay? So it's very important that you do have to collect your data in a very appropriate way so that pretty much you can make valid conclusions. The method used to collect sample data influences the quality of statistical analysis. And of particular importance is the simple random sample. Now later on we're going to be talking about that particular term, simple random sample. Okay, let's look at some basics of collecting data. Statistical methods are driven by the data that we collect. We typically obtain data from two distinct sources: observational studies and experiment. Okay, so let's talk about what an observational study is. An observational study is observing and measuring specific characteristics without attempting to modify the subjects being studied. So in this case here, let's say if I had this situation. Here the Pew Research Center surveyed 2,252 adults and found that 59% of them go online wirelessly. That would be an example of an observational study because the adults had no treatment applied to them. Okay? So here, if no treatment is applied to them and then we just observed these 2,252 adults, then that would be an observational study. The next type is an experiment. And this applies some treatment and then observe its effects on the subject. So here the subjects in experiments are called experimental units. Example would be this: if I wanted to test whether or not a certain drug is effective on relieving headaches, I would give probably 20 people the drug and the other 20 what they call a fake drug or what they call a placebo, and find out whether or not it's effective on headaches. Okay, so a treatment is applied to those subjects to determine whether or not their headaches are gone. Okay, so here's the example there that I just went over with the observational study, where you have the Pew Research Center surveying 2,252 adults and 59% of them go online wirelessly. So that's an observational study. And this one is a experiment. And the largest public health experiment ever conducted, 200,745 children were given the Salk vaccine, while another 201,229 children were given a placebo. The vaccine injections constitute a treatment that modified the subject, so this is what we call an experiment. Okay, because a treatment was applied. Okay, take a look at this first example so we can determine whether this is an observational study or an experiment. In a study of 412 boys with a particular disease, the subjects were photographed daily. Okay, so here there was no treatment applied. They were just photographed. So here this would be an observational study. Keep in mind, only in an experiment you have to apply some type of treatment. And in this case, there was no treatment applied. Okay, because the subjects were just photographed on a daily basis. So this is an observational study. Okay. Okay, now next we're going to look at this term. Now you want to be very familiar with the term simple random sample, because throughout this entire course, you are going to see this term pop up from time to time. And it's very important that you understand the concept or the definition of a simple random sample. It is this: a sample of n subjects is selected in such a way that every possible sample of the same size n has the same chance of being selected. Okay? So let's look at something like this. Let's say I had numbers in this particular set like 41, 31, 18, 12, 26, 33, 11, 19, 40, 53, 74, and let's say 19. In a simple random sample, each of this possible sample, let's say this sample right here, and this sample right here, of the same size, a sample of 4 numbers, and another sample of 4 numbers, and here's another sample of 4 numbers. Each one of them has the same chance of being chosen. That's what we mean by a simple random sample. Okay? Now let's look at a couple of examples where we can determine whether or not we have a simple random sample. Okay, take a look at this example E7 that I'm going to put up here. A quality control engineer selects every 15,000th chocolate that is produced. Here, every 15,000 chocolate is being selected that's been produced. Here, this is not a simple random sample because it does not show that a samples of the same size having an equal chance of being selected. So this is not a simple random sample. Okay, because it's only saying that every 15,000th chocolate is being produced. But what about the other 14,999? They're not being selected, so they don't have an equal chance of being selected. So here, that's not a simple random sample. Okay, another example. Last year, 142,000 adults paid taxes in the country. A researcher plans to conduct a survey of 600 of those taxpayers. After obtaining a list of those who pay taxes, he numbers the list from 1 to 102,400, and then he uses a computer to randomly generate 600 numbers between 1 and 102,400. His sample consists of taxpayers corresponding to selected numbers. In this case, this is a simple random sample. Because of the fact that every sample of 600 taxpayers will have an equal chance of being selected. Okay, that's what we mean by a simple random sample. Every sample of size 600 will have an equal chance of being selected. Okay. Now let's look at some other sampling methods. In a previous video, in one of the other videos, we talked about coming up with a sampling method. One of them is just a plain random sample, where members from the population are being selected in such a way that each individual member in the population has an equal chance of being selected. So let's say I have a population of only 30 students in one class. What that random sample means is this, that each and every 30 students that are in my class has a chance of being selected. That's just a plain random sample. Okay, another type of sampling method would be a systematic sampling. You select some starting point and then select every kth element in the population. In this case, right here, you're seeing that you're starting off with the third individual, and then we're going to select every third individual in that population. That's a systematic sampling method. And then next is a convenience sampling. Here we use results that are easy to get. Okay. One good example of convenience sampling is like if you were in the mall and then there was somebody that wanted to conduct a survey, and then they try to flag you down and then ask you to take that survey. That's a convenience sampling because they can get people in the mall to complete surveys, because there are people that go into the mall every single day to do some shopping. So that's a convenience sampling. Now this next type is a stratified sampling approach. What you'll do is subdivide the population into at least 2 different subgroups that share the same characteristics, and then you'll draw a sample from each subgroup or stratum. So here we separate women and men in this case, and then we draw a sample from each of the subgroups. Draw a sample from the women, draw a sample from the men. That's an example of stratified sampling. And then we have cluster sampling. Now, in a cluster sample, what you'll do is divide the population area into sections or clusters, and then you're going to randomly select some of those clusters. And then you'll choose all the members from those selected clusters. Okay? So let's say in a city, you want to separate a particular city into different precincts, as you can see here. Take one city and then it's divided into precincts, and then you'll randomly select those precincts and then choose all the members that are in that precinct that you have selected. Okay? That's what cluster sampling is. Okay, now let's look at some examples. In this case, we want to identify the type of sampling used, whether it's a random sample, systematic sample, convenience sample, stratified, or cluster sampling in the situation described below. In example E2 is this: a woman is selected by a marketing company to participate in a paid focus group. The company says that the woman was selected because everyone in 6 randomly selected towns was being selected. Alright, now let's look at this. You got 6 randomly selected towns, and everyone in those 6 randomly selected towns was being selected. So here, that's an example of cluster sampling. Because you have a town, well, actually, you have 6 randomly selected towns, and then every individual in each of those randomly selected towns was selected. So that's cluster sampling. Next example. Same thing. In a poll conducted by a certain research center, 891 adults were called after their telephone numbers were randomly generated by a computer, and 76% were able to correctly identify the president. Okay. Well, let's look at this. 891 adults were just called after telephone numbers were randomly selected. That's just a random sample. It's not a simple random sample, but it's just random sampling. Because in this case, here, it doesn't say that the samples of the same size have an equal chance of being selected. So it's just saying that 891 adults were just randomly selected. So it's just a plain random sampling. Okay. Next example is this. Identify which type of sampling is used. And an internet site asks its members to call in their opinions regarding their web searching habits. Okay, this one is a convenience sampling, and the reason for that is this. You're asking people to call in their opinion regarding their web searching habits, so that's convenience. Okay, now the next example. To estimate the percentage of defects in a recent manufacturing batch, a quality control manager at Daimler Chrysler selects every 11th van that comes off the assembly line, starting with the 6th until she obtains a sample of 30 vans. She's starting with the 6th van and will choose every 11th van until she gets a sample of 30. That's called systematic sampling. Systematic sampling. Because she's starting off with the 6th van, and then she's going to choose every 11th van. So she's using a systematic sampling approach. And then finally, to determine customer opinion of their food quality, General Foods randomly selects 90 city blocks during a certain week and surveys all homes within the city blocks. Okay, this one's cluster sampling. 90 city blocks were randomly selected. All homes within each of those city blocks was surveyed. So here this will be cluster sampling. Okay. Alright, so here, this will conclude that video on collecting sample data, and hopefully this will assist you with understanding how data is to be collected and the methods that you can use to collect that particular a particular set of data.